Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football late Wednesday night. Brian Kelly, the LSU Tigers, land a monster commitment. Five-star edge rusher Trenton Henderson committing to LSU. Look, I think it's very clear that Brian Kelly, this LSU staff, very high on Trenton Henderson, a guy that was kind of trending to Florida for the last month. Brian Kelly and LSU come late in the process and get this one done. This LSU program, when it comes to talent acquisition, really one of the more fascinating programs to monitor. Where you look at LSU in the 2026 cycle, this is only their 12th commitment in the class of 2026, but it is hyper talented. And I think that's very clear. That's probably the recipe, and what I would say is the route that LSU wants to take is, hey, we're going to focus on some of the best players across the country at the high school ranks. We ain't going to bring in 30 plus high school kids every single year, but the guys that we are going to bring in are going to be studs. And then we're going to fill in the rest in the transfer portal. And look, in this era of college football, there's plenty of different ways to go about building a roster. It's hard to argue with what Brian Kelly has done, where I look at LSU and say, look, in 3 years, Brian Kelly took this LSU roster from a complete disaster when he got to LSU to going into 2025, where you're looking at this LSU team and say, hey, they comfortably have enough talent on this roster to go compete and arguably win a national championship in 2025. So, look, does it look a little bit different from a lot of other programs across the country? Yeah, it definitely does. But at the same time, it's hard to argue with the process that Brian Kelly is going through in terms of building this roster, because it's a dang talented one in 2025. And guess what? Going to be really talented in 2026 as well. We've gone 2 minutes. Haven't even talked about Trent Henderson as a prospect, who I think has the ability to be one of the more dangerous edge rushers that you see in the entire country. This kid was born in a laboratory, or made in a laboratory, to be a really good pass rusher in the SEC. He's got all the physical traits. Before we get into him, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the LSU fans. Ideally, some more fireworks coming relatively soon for this program on the recruiting trail. Really has been a blast. Going back to the winter months, covering this team in the transfer portal and then covering this team on the high school recruiting trail, the amount of support y'all continue to show to the boys, amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into Trenton Henderson. And look, there's a reason 24/7 Sports has this kid as a 5-star prospect. 6'4", 225, a lot of frame to fill out. Ain't no question about that. But in terms of length, in terms of first step, in terms of flexibility in bend, there's not many edge rushers in the country that can challenge tackles on the outside shoulder like Trenton Henderson can. Now, here's what's really intriguing about Trenton Henderson. Really powerful kid too. And I think he's only going to be more powerful as he gets into this LSU program, adds a little bit more weight on the frame. Right now, he primarily wins with that length and athleticism. Like, there's just not a lot of high school tackles that can deal with the juice that Trenton Henderson has coming off the edge. When he develops a little bit more power, especially in the hands with all the length that he has, the ability to be a really disruptive pass rusher is certainly there. He's got all the traits, just needs to add a little bit more weight, probably develop a little bit in terms of stopping the run. But if you get him to maximize what he can be, you're looking at a potential first-round NFL draft pick, which I think ushers us into a really intriguing conversation in terms of how LSU is going about building their roster, specifically in the 2026 class. They are valuing the line. I guess the best way to sum up what LSU is doing is, hey, we're going to have some holes in our 2026 cycle. JJ Bush sounds like he's trending to Arkansas, really the only linebacker that's clearly on LSU's board. Doesn't sound like they're going to bring in a quarterback for the second consecutive year. No running back on the board with KJ Edwards committing to Texas A&M. There are going to be some holes in the 2026 class, but the amount of talent that they are going to bring in They're difference makers. And look at where LSU is really prioritizing on the recruiting trail. Got a couple of difference makers at the wide receiver position, but most importantly, on the lines of scrimmage. Bryson Martinez, one of my favorite tackles. You're trending for a guy like Darius Gray as well. LSU, I think, is taking the approach of, hey, it's really hard to address the line of scrimmage play in the transfer portal. It's going to be expensive, and you're not really sure what kind of bodies are going to be there. So get him at the high school ranks. That's what LSU's doing. I mean, look at the most prioritized prospects on the board were guys like Bryson Martinez. Are guys like Darius Gray or Lamar Brown or a guy like Trenton Henderson. You can't find those kind of players in the transfer portal. Well, guess what? You can find. You can find a Barian Brown. You can find a guy like Nick Anderson. There are other positions, running back position. Like you very well can find running backs in the transfer portal. I think what LSU's saying here is, hey, there are certain positions that we don't need to take guys that we don't absolutely love at the high school ranks when it's positions that we can address in the transfer portal. Now, look, it's hard to find an offensive lineman that looks like Darius Gray. You ain't going to find a guy like Lamar Brown in the transfer portal nor Trenton Henderson. All right, make sure you get those guys out of the high school ranks, the guys that provide you massive ceilings in terms of what they can be over the next couple of years. If you need to go grab a running back, you need to go add a tight end, you can do that. There are Bauer Sharps in the transfer portal. You look at the list of running backs and say, hey, there were a lot of good running backs. I'm not even sure if LSU needs one. Bringing 2 top 10 running backs in 2025. The last conversation is quarterback. This is probably the second consecutive year unless something changes. And I will say this, Bo Bentley, just keep an eye on the situation that unfolds with Oklahoma this year. Like there's a very real situation that Brent Venables doesn't work out at Oklahoma, and maybe Oklahoma's trying to find a new head coach. And then very well, Bo Bentley could be committing to LSU in December. Regardless of that, I think LSU made a really good decision to go convince a guy like Mike Van Buren, who very well could have transferred to a lot of other programs and started in the 2025 year. They say, hey, come to LSU. You can have that redshirt year that you didn't get at Mississippi State. You taking over the reins from Garrett Nussmeier after he finishes out his career in 2025. But I think just as importantly, the 2027 quarterback class, LSU probably going to land too. And you got 3 studs in the state of Louisiana. You also got Nuss's little brother, Colton Nussmeier, who's in the 2027 class. I would be stunned. LSU's going to land 1 stud. We know that. Wouldn't be surprised if LSU's like, hey, we'll just go out and land 2 quarterbacks in 2027, and we shouldn't have a problem doing that because we don't have a ton of young quarterbacks on our roster. It's a little unconventional. It's a little bit unorthodox, but I'll say this, it's hard to argue with what Brian Kelly is doing in terms of building this roster because over the last 24 plus months, over the last 3 years, this LSU roster went from an absolute dumpster fire when Brian Kelly took over to a team that has the talent to win a national championship in 2025. And this roster is going to be in just a very good spot in 2026 as well. It's an interesting conversation. It's one of the more fascinating case studies that you see in college football. But I'll say this, there ain't many programs that are balancing the new era of college football where you want to recruit the high school ranks, you want to supplement in the transfer portal. Brian Kelly, in my opinion, doing a really dang good job of building this roster to a point where, hey, we can go out and compete for national championships. Yes, it might look a little bit different from some of the other programs that you see across the country. Here's a little side note, and sorry for rambling a little bit. This is something I've been thinking of. Why sign 30 plus kids and this is not necessarily like I'm arguing against recruiting the high school ranks, but I'm saying this. Look, you can either allocate a lot of resources to bring in a 4-star linebacker at the high school ranks that might need 1 to 2 years before he's ready to play, or you could just go out and sign a known commodity in the transfer portal to come in for a year or 2 and play. Look, you need to recruit some cats at the high school ranks, especially the line of scrimmage guys. Like, you ain't going to find a Lamar Brown in the transfer portal. So if you want access to that kind of talent, go get it at the high school ranks. But for a lot of these other positions, if you're just kind of iffy on a guy like J.J. Bush, LSU, Arkansas kind of battling it out for his commitment. I should check my phone because I'm not really sure if he committed or not. Why not just say, hey, that's okay. You can let JJ Bush walk. And we can just go get a really solid linebacker in the transfer portal that we know what we're getting and we know it's going to be immediate, as opposed to bringing in a guy like JJ Bush. And he's probably not playing for the first 2 years, but you're allocating resources to him. There are certain positions and I think certain situations where maybe it just makes more sense to go add players in the portal who are known commodities. The resources that you're allocating those football players probably going to translate to on-field production, where the high school ranks, sometimes you're not really sure and you're still kind of taking lottery tickets. We'll see how it works out. Such a these are the conversations that I love, where it's like nitty gritty roster building conversations, a lot of different ways to go about doing it. LSU's got a little bit of a different way. We're going to see if it works out. I think it has worked out because you look at this team in 2025 and say it's a damn good football team. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.